As part of our series, The Miracles of Jesus According to the Gospels, we've already explored several awe-inspiring moments from Jesus' ministry. We began with Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana, demonstrating his divine authority and compassion for ordinary life. Then we witnessed the healing of the royal official's son, where Jesus' word alone brought a child back to health, showing the power of faith. We joined the first miraculous catch of fish, marveling at how Jesus provided abundantly for his followers. In Capernaum, we saw Jesus heal a man with an unclean spirit, revealing his authority over darkness and evil. He also healed Peter's mother-in-law, restoring her strength and service to her household. Jesus' compassion continued as he healed a man with leprosy, defying social barriers and showing that no one is beyond God's love. We witnessed faith in action when he healed a paralytic lowered through the roof, emphasizing the power of persistent belief. His mercy extended to the synagogue when he healed a man with a withered hand, challenging both physical and spiritual limitations. Finally, we observed Jesus' authority and compassion in the healing of the centurion's servant, a story highlighting humility and faith from unexpected places. In this video, we continue our journey, exploring even more of Jesus' miraculous works, uncovering not just the wonders themselves, but the deeper lessons of faith, compassion, and divine authority they reveal. Join us as we dive deeper into these incredible stories of Jesus' power and love. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment of this inspiring series. The town of Nain was quiet with sorrow. A funeral procession moved slowly through the streets, carrying the lifeless body of a young man, the only son of a grieving widow. Mothers and fathers knew the despair of loss, but for this woman, the loss was complete. There were no consoling words, no remedies left to try, only the weight of grief pressing on every shoulder in the procession. Jesus and his disciples happened upon the scene. The crowd noticed him immediately, whispering with curiosity and hope. Seeing the widow, his heart was moved with compassion. Without hesitation, he approached the procession. "Do not weep," he said softly, addressing her pain directly. Then he touched the coffin, an act that startled everyone. Custom dictated distance from death, but Jesus stepped closer, unafraid. With authority, he commanded, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The crowd held its breath, and then, impossibly, the dead sat up and began to speak. Life returned where there had only been silence. The young man was handed back to his mother, restored, whole, and breathing. The people were overwhelmed. Awe swept through the crowd like a wave. Fear mingled with wonder. They proclaimed, "A great prophet has appeared among us," and whispers spread, "God has visited his people." This miracle marked a turning point. It revealed that Jesus' authority was not limited to sickness, weakness, or distance. He had power over death itself. And word of this spread quickly, drawing even more people to him. The stage was now set for even greater challenges. Crowds would grow, skepticism would harden, and his authority would increasingly confront both physical and spiritual boundaries. Next, Jesus would calm a raging storm, showing that his power extended not only over human suffering, but over the very forces of nature. The disciples had seen many miracles, but nothing prepared them for the fury of nature. After a long day of teaching and healing along the shores of Galilee, Jesus suggested they cross to the other side of the lake. The boat cut through calm waters at first, the sun dipping low, but as they ventured further, the wind began to rise. Suddenly, waves slammed against the sides, drenching the disciples and threatening to capsize the small vessel. Panic set in. These were men who knew the lake, men who had wrestled with storms before, yet this one felt unstoppable. Jesus, however, lay asleep in the stern, seemingly untouched by the chaos. Fear turned to desperation, and the disciples shook him awake. "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." His reply was calm, almost questioning. "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he rose and spoke to the wind and the waves. In an instant, the storm vanished. The lake's surface became smooth, the danger gone as though it had never existed. The disciples were left in stunned silence. Awe replaced fear. Everything they had known about authority, power, and the world shifted in that moment. The one who had healed the sick, restored life, and commanded demons could command the very elements themselves. Even as they tried to comprehend it, far off along the shore, someone's desperate cries would soon reach him. A man possessed and tormented, bound not by water or wind, but by something far darker. Jesus and his disciples arrived on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, entering the region of the Gerasenes. The area was known for its tombs, desolate hills, and people who lived on the margins of society. It was here that they encountered a man unlike any they had seen before. He was tormented by an unclean spirit, living among the tombs. No one could bind him, not with chains, not with shackles. He screamed day and night, cutting himself with stones, driven by a force that had stolen his mind and dignity. Villagers kept their distance, fearful and hopeless, whispering about the cursed man who roamed the hills. When the man saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell before him, crying out with a voice both terrified and desperate, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." Jesus commanded the spirit to speak, asking the man's name. The answer came with horror. "My name is Legion, for we are many." The disciples watched in disbelief as Jesus confronted the darkness, not with fear, but with authority. He commanded the spirits to come out of the man. The unclean spirits begged, pleading to be sent into a herd of pigs grazing nearby. Jesus permitted it, and in a sudden rush, the demons left the man and entered the animals, which then ran down the steep hillside and drowned in the lake. The man collapsed, free at last. His mind, once a battlefield, was calm. His strength, once twisted into destruction, was restored. Villagers, seeing the transformation, were amazed and frightened, realizing that even forces beyond human control obeyed him. The man, no longer bound by chains or fear, begged to follow Jesus, but he sent him home with a new purpose: to proclaim what had happened and share the power of God's mercy. Even in that remote place, far from towns and crowds, the story of Jesus' authority spread. Word would continue to reach villages and cities, carrying whispers of a man who could heal bodies, silence storms, and confront forces no one else dared face. Among the crowds following Jesus, there was a woman who had suffered in silence for 12 long years. She had spent all she had on doctors, seeking relief that never came. Her body was weak, her spirit weary, and her condition made her an outcast, untouchable under the law, hidden from friends and family. Yet hope drew her forward. She had heard of Jesus, of his authority, of the way he healed the sick. If she could just touch his clothes, she believed, she might be made whole. The crowd pressed around him, thick and jostling, but she moved with determination, slipping through unnoticed, driven by desperation and faith. When her hand brushed the edge of his cloak, something extraordinary happened. Jesus stopped immediately. "Who touched me?" he asked, turning to the crowd, though everyone had been rubbing against him. The woman, trembling, fell at his feet and confessed everything. "Daughter," Jesus said, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Instantly, relief coursed through her body. 12 years of pain vanished. She stood, whole, restored, and alive. The crowd could see it, but only she understood the depth of what had just occurred. This miracle revealed the quiet power of faith, the kind that moves through crowds, crosses barriers, and touches the source of life itself. It was not dramatic, not explosive, yet it changed everything for one woman who had given up hope. Even as she walked away, fully restored, others would bring more needs to Jesus. A girl lying at death's door, a desperate father pleading for his child's life, showing that faith, courage, and trust would continue to lead people into his presence. Jairus, a synagogue leader, knelt at Jesus' feet, his face pale with fear and hope intertwined. His daughter lay at the point of death, and no medicine, no ritual, no plea from family had worked. In desperation, he came to the man people whispered about, the teacher whose words calmed storms and whose touch healed the sick. As they made their way to Jairus' house, a crowd pressed in around Jesus. The path was slow, filled with noise and commotion, yet hope did not waver. Midway, a woman, suffering for 12 years from bleeding, touched his cloak and was healed, showing that faith often intersects in unexpected ways. By the time Jesus arrived, word came, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." Fear threatened to crush Jairus' remaining hope, but Jesus looked at him and said with quiet authority, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Inside the house, mourners filled the room, crying and wailing over the girl's lifeless body. Jesus took her by the hand and said, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." The child rose immediately, breathing and moving, restored to life. Parents wept, awe and joy mingling as they embraced her. The crowd was speechless, a mixture of amazement, fear, and wonder at what they had witnessed. This miracle revealed that Jesus' power was not limited by time, distance, or the finality of death. Faith, trust, in his authority could undo what seemed irreversible. Lives, families, and communities were being transformed, one encounter at a time. As whispers of his authority spread beyond Galilee, more people from towns near and far would be drawn to him. Those who were sick, blind, demon-possessed, and even those living with despair no one could heal. As Jesus walked through the towns of Galilee, two men blind from birth had heard of him before seeing him. Stories of healings, authority, and compassion had spread faster than the crowds themselves. Desperation drove them forward, hope propelling each step. They began calling out, their voices breaking through the marketplace. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd hesitated, murmuring in surprise, but the blind men refused to be ignored, pressing closer to the man they believed could restore their sight. Jesus stopped. He turned to them, his gaze steady and calm. "Do you believe I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they cried. He touched their eyes and spoke softly but with power. "According to your faith, let it be done to you." In an instant, darkness vanished. Shapes, colors, and faces emerged where only shadows had existed for years. The men blinked, astonished, drinking in a world they had only imagined. Their steps faltered as they adjusted to sight, but joy and awe flooded their hearts. Jesus instructed them not to tell anyone, but their astonishment was too great. They left immediately, walking through the streets of the town, their vision restored, and with it, a profound recognition of who he was. As they went, others were still being brought forward, some with sickness, some with ailments that could not be explained, and some bound by forces beyond human understanding. Among them was a man unable to speak, trapped in silence, whose desperation would soon meet Jesus' healing touch. Among the crowds that pressed around Jesus was a man who had never spoken a word since being possessed by an unclean spirit. Wherever he went, silence followed, and misunderstanding shadowed every step. Families whispered of his condition, neighbors avoided him, and despair had long settled in his heart. When he was brought to Jesus, the crowd held its breath. This was not a simple sickness or a visible injury. This was a life silenced, a mind trapped, a spirit oppressed by forces that no one else could command. Jesus approached him, and the atmosphere seemed to shift. Authority radiated from him, not in force, but in certainty. The man looked at him, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. With a calm, commanding voice, Jesus said, "Be healed." Immediately the oppressive spirit fled, and the man spoke clearly for the first time. Words flowed from his lips like water, and astonishment rippled through the crowd. Those who had doubted, who had whispered, who had feared, now watched in awe as life and voice were restored. The people marveled, but not everyone rejoiced. Some scribes whispered among themselves, accusing Jesus of working with dark powers. Yet the miracle was undeniable. Healing, liberation, restoration, all in one moment. Even as the man began to speak and rejoice, the crowds continued to swell, bringing the sick, the blind, and the suffering. The crowds had followed Jesus for days, traveling across hills and along dusty paths. They came hungry, not just for bread, but for hope, for healing, for the words that could touch their hearts. By the time they reached the remote hillside near Bethsaida, the sun hung high, and their stomachs ached from the journey. There was no food, no preparation, only the vast hillside and thousands of people waiting. Jesus looked over the crowd, knowing the hunger ran deeper than empty stomachs. He asked his disciples a simple question: "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" The disciples counted what little they had and found it hopeless. 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. It was nothing. Too small. Impossible to feed thousands. But Jesus had never been constrained by what seemed impossible. He took the loaves and fish, gave thanks, and began to distribute them. His disciples followed, handing pieces to the crowd as he instructed. Slowly, miraculously, the small supply began to grow. More than enough fed everyone. The hillside echoed with the sounds of eating and laughter. Adults and children alike were satisfied. Not a scrap was wasted. 12 baskets of leftovers remained. The people were stunned. They had come expecting a teacher, a healer, maybe words of comfort. Instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. Bread multiplied before their eyes, a tangible sign that abundance and provision were not limited to what humans could see or calculate. This miracle was more than feeding bodies. It revealed Jesus' care for every need, physical and spiritual. The crowd saw that he could take the ordinary and make it extraordinary, the insufficient and turn it into plenty. And as the sun began to set, they followed him, curious about what other surprises this man of compassion and power might have in store. Amid the hills, as the people rested with their baskets emptied and hearts full, whispers of a storm calmed, a paralytic healed, and thousands fed by one man's hands began to spread beyond Galilee. After feeding the crowd on the hillside, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and cross the Sea of Galilee while he went up the mountain to pray alone. Darkness settled over the lake, and the wind began to pick up. Waves crashed against the boat, rocking it violently. The disciples, experienced fishermen who had spent their lives on this water, struggled against the storm, their muscles straining and their hearts racing with fear. In the middle of the night, their eyes caught a figure moving across the water. At first, they thought it was a ghost. Panic spread through the boat, and cries of terror echoed against the wind. "It's a ghost! It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke immediately, his voice calm and commanding over the chaos. "Take courage! It is I! Don't be afraid!" Peter, always bold, shouted back, "Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," Jesus replied. Peter stepped out of the boat. For a moment, the impossible became possible. He walked across the stormy sea toward Jesus, each step sustained by faith. But fear and doubt crept in. He noticed the waves, the wind, and began to sink. "Lord, save me!" he cried. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said gently. "Why did you doubt?" Together, they climbed into the boat, and the wind died down. The disciples were filled with awe, their minds reeling. They had seen a man not only heal the sick and feed thousands, but defy the natural laws of the world itself. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving calm waters and a new understanding. The one who controlled wind and waves could be trusted in every trial. And as the boat reached the shore, the crowds gathered again, bringing those sick, desperate, and blind to him, ready to witness power that stretched even further, beyond the waters, beyond the limits of human expectation. Jesus had left Galilee and traveled to the region of Tyre and Sidon, a Gentile territory far from familiar crowds. Here, a woman approached him, carrying deep desperation and fierce hope. Her daughter was possessed by a demon, tormented and suffering, and nothing in her life had offered relief. The woman knelt before Jesus, pleading, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on my daughter. My daughter is suffering terribly." At first, Jesus remained silent. The disciples watched, unsure of how he would respond. Then he said something that startled her. "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." The woman did not falter. With humility and determination, she replied, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Jesus looked at her, seeing not only her courage but the depth of her faith. He smiled and said, "For saying this, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." Immediately, the woman returned home and found her daughter healed. Relief and joy replaced despair. The power of faith had crossed cultural and social boundaries, showing that Jesus' authority was not limited by geography or tradition. As the news spread, it became clear that Jesus' ministry was expanding beyond familiar towns and regions. People began to bring others who were sick, suffering, or oppressed, recognizing that his touch and word could break every kind of bondage. Jesus traveled through the region of Decapolis, where the crowds were smaller but no less desperate. People came carrying a man who could neither hear nor speak, his life limited by silence and isolation. Friends and family pleaded with Jesus, bringing him to the center of the gathering, hoping that the stories of healing were true. Jesus took the man aside, away from the pressing crowd, and used his hands to touch him. He looked into the man's eyes, a calm authority in his gaze. Then, speaking with power, he whispered words that would transform the man's life. Ephatha, which means, "be opened." Immediately, the man's ears were opened and his tongue was freed. Words that had never sounded before now flowed naturally, forming sentences, laughter, and awe. The crowd could hardly believe their eyes, witnessing the impossible. Someone who had known only silence could now hear and speak. The people were astonished. "He has done everything well," they exclaimed. "He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." Families wept with joy, and news spread swiftly through the towns, carrying the message of mercy and power wherever he went. The healing did not end with one man. Word traveled quickly, and others began to arrive, drawn by hope and the testimony of the healed. Jesus had moved on from the region of Tyre and Sidon, traveling along the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. A large crowd followed him, numbering in the thousands, drawn by the stories of healing, deliverance, and provision. They had been with him for 3 days, listening, watching, and hoping, but now their stomachs began to grumble, and concern grew among the disciples. Seeing the crowd, Jesus' heart was moved with compassion. They were tired, hungry, and far from any marketplace. He called his disciples together and asked how they could feed so many. They counted what they had: 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish, barely enough for a handful of people, let alone thousands. Jesus gave thanks and began to distribute the bread and fish. The disciples handed it to the crowd, piece by piece. Miraculously, the small supply multiplied. Everyone ate until full, and when all were satisfied, 7 baskets of leftovers remained. The crowd was amazed, recalling the first miracle of feeding thousands on a hillside with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Once again, Jesus had taken the ordinary and made it extraordinary. The miracle demonstrated that his care and provision were limitless, not constrained by scarcity or human expectation. As the people finished eating and dispersed, whispers spread quickly. The healer of the sick, the raiser of the dead, the master over storms and seas, could also multiply food, providing abundance where there had been none. And among the crowd, others with urgent needs, sick, blind, or oppressed, looked on with hope, realizing that the same hands that fed thousands could touch their lives in ways they had only dreamed of. Jesus arrived in Bethsaida, a quiet town along the lake, and the people brought to him a man who had been blind for years. His friends and family pleaded, desperate for even a glimpse of hope. The man's life had been lived in shadows, his world defined by darkness and uncertainty. Jesus took him outside the village, away from the press of the crowd, and guided him carefully. He spit on the man's eyes, laid his hands upon him, and asked, "Do you see anything?" The man blinked, looked around, and responded with uncertainty, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again. This time the man's vision was fully restored. He could see clearly, every detail, every color, every face. Jesus sent him home with a simple instruction: don't even go into the village. This miracle revealed something unique. Sometimes healing comes in stages. Transformation is not always instant. Growth, clarity, and understanding often unfold gradually. The people of Bethsaida watched in awe, witnessing not just a restoration of sight, but the patience and authority of the one who heals. Word spread quietly through the town, and even as the man returned to his life, others were beginning to see the possibilities of encountering Jesus. People suffering from blindness, disease, or oppression, who would soon experience the same mercy and power. As Jesus walked along the streets of Jerusalem, he noticed a man sitting by the roadside, blind from birth, his life defined by darkness. Those around him whispered about him, wondering why he had been born this way, questioning fate, sin, and circumstance. Jesus approached him, kneeling to meet his eyes even without sight. He spat on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and carefully placed it over the man's eyes. Then he spoke simply, but with authority. "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." The man obeyed. He walked uncertain and trembling toward the pool. When he washed, light exploded into his world. Shapes, colors, and faces, everything he had never seen, now came into focus. He could see the sky, the people around him, and even the one who had touched his eyes. Neighbors and onlookers were astonished. Some doubted, some questioned, and others celebrated. A man who had never known sight now moved through the world fully aware, experiencing reality in ways previously impossible. This miracle was profound, not just for its physical restoration, but for its spiritual symbolism. Light coming into darkness, faith overcoming limitation, and the breaking of barriers that had existed since birth. Even as the man's eyes adjusted to the new world around him, the impact of Jesus' power began to ripple outward. Others, those trapped in sickness, deafness, or oppression, would soon find that the same authority that restored his sight could bring freedom in ways the world could never imagine. Jesus was teaching in a synagogue on the Sabbath, his words drawing a crowd eager to hear him speak. Among the listeners was a woman who had been crippled for 18 years, bent over and unable to straighten her back. Her life had been a series of limitations, defined by pain, social isolation, and the weight of helplessness. When Jesus saw her, his heart was moved. He called her forward and said, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." He laid his hands on her, and immediately her back straightened. She stood tall for the first time in nearly 2 decades, her body restored, her strength renewed. The crowd erupted in awe, but the religious leaders were indignant. Healing on the Sabbath, they whispered, was forbidden. Jesus turned to them, his voice steady and uncompromising. "You hypocrites, does not each of you untie your ox or donkey on the Sabbath and lead it to water? Should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, be set free from her bondage on the Sabbath?" The leaders were silenced and the crowd rejoiced at the mercy and authority of Jesus. The woman, liberated in body and spirit, became a living testimony of God's power to break chains, even when tradition tried to hold them tight. As the synagogue emptied, the whispers spread beyond its walls. People carried news of a teacher who healed the crippled, gave sight to the blind, and freed the oppressed, drawing crowds of the sick and desperate from near and far. Among them, a man with dropsy would soon stand before Jesus, his life hanging on the edge of hope, unaware that the same hands that straightened this woman's back were reaching toward him next. One Sabbath, Jesus entered the home of a prominent Pharisee to teach and share a meal. Among the guests was a man suffering from dropsy, swollen and weakened by his condition, unable to move with ease or sit comfortably. The guests murmured, observing, waiting to see how Jesus would respond in the confines of their carefully arranged Sabbath rules. Jesus approached the man, his eyes full of compassion. Without hesitation, he asked the guests a question that cut through tradition. "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" Silence fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on him, some curious, some skeptical, all aware that what he was about to do would challenge their understanding of the law. Then with calm authority, Jesus touched the man and healed him, immediately restoring health, mobility, and dignity. He was able to stand and move without pain, no longer bound by the disease that had burdened him. The room was stunned. The Pharisees and teachers of the law were silent, caught between awe and anger. Jesus turned the moment into a lesson about mercy and human need, showing that compassion must outweigh rigid adherence to rules. Word of the healing spread quickly. People whispered about the man with dropsy restored, and about the authority of the one who could heal with a touch, challenge tradition, and teach truth in a single act. The crowd outside continued to swell, bringing the sick, the blind, and the oppressed. People desperate to encounter the same mercy that could transform their lives. Jesus was traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee when he encountered 10 men with leprosy, standing at a distance, their faces marked by the disease that had isolated them for years. They raised their voices together, desperate. "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." The crowd and the disciples watched, unsure what would happen. The disease had cast these men into the shadows of society, forcing them into exile, unable to touch others or be touched. Yet here, before the one who had healed the sick, their hope surged. Jesus responded with simple authority. "Go, show yourselves to the priests." As they walked away, their leprosy disappeared. Their skin was restored, their bodies whole, and their spirits lifted from the despair that had defined them. One of them, realizing the miracle, turned back, falling at Jesus' feet in gratitude, praising God loudly. Jesus noted the man's faith and said, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." The healing was immediate, yet the lesson profound. Not all responded in the same way. Some experienced restoration, but walked on without returning gratitude. One returned, changed not only in body but in heart. Word of the healing of the 10 lepers spread quickly, and as the grateful man went on his way, others, those blind, mute, or oppressed, continued to seek Jesus. Word reached Jesus that Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, was gravely ill. His sisters sent urgent messages. "Lord, come quickly, our brother is dying." But Jesus delayed. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. The mourners gathered, grief thick in the air, and hope seemed lost. When Jesus arrived in Bethany, he was met by Mary and Martha, both overwhelmed with sorrow. Martha approached him first, her voice shaking. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus reassured her with words that stretched beyond grief. "Your brother will rise again." The crowd, aware of the loss, gathered at the tomb. Tears filled the eyes of those watching as Jesus stood before the stone that sealed Lazarus' grave. He prayed aloud, giving thanks to the Father, and then, with authority that transcended death, he cried, "Lazarus, come out!" A moment of silence held everyone in suspense. Then Lazarus emerged, bound in burial cloths but alive, stepping into the sunlight once more. The mourners gasped, joy and disbelief mingling as they witnessed the impossible. Life had returned where there had been only death. This miracle revealed that Jesus had authority not just over sickness, nature, or spiritual oppression, but over life and death itself. The people marveled, and many began to believe in him, while the religious leaders' fear grew, plotting more urgently to stop the one who could even raise the dead. Even as Lazarus walked free, the story of Jesus' power spread like wildfire. His touch, his words, his authority, the same that calmed storms, restored sight, and healed the broken, was now known to conquer the ultimate enemy, death itself. Jesus and his disciples arrived at Jericho, where a large crowd had gathered along the road. Among them was Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, sitting by the roadside, his life confined by darkness and dependence. He had heard of Jesus' miracles, of the healings, the authority, and the mercy, and hope stirred in his heart. Bartimaeus began shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me!" The crowd tried to silence him, but his cries only grew louder. Another blind man, witnessing Bartimaeus' bold faith, joined in, their voices overlapping in desperation and hope. Jesus stopped and called them over. When they reached him, he asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Rabbi, let us see," they replied. Jesus touched their eyes and said, "Go, your faith has healed you." Immediately their eyes opened. Light flooded in where there had been only darkness. They saw the road, the crowd, the faces of friends and strangers, and they saw Jesus. The crowd gasped in astonishment, Men who had been blind from birth or for many years were now walking and seeing, experiencing a world transformed by a single touch and word. Bartimaeus and the other blind man followed Jesus, rejoicing, their lives forever changed by the mercy and authority of God. Word spread quickly through Jericho. The teacher from Galilee, who healed the blind, cast out demons, and even raised the dead, had passed through their streets once more. People began to gather, seeking the same power that could open eyes, restore hope, and transform life itself. Early in the morning, Jesus and his disciples were walking from Bethany toward Jerusalem. Along the way, he noticed a fig tree, full of leaves promising fruit. Yet when he approached it, he found no figs. Jesus said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And immediately the tree withered from its roots. The disciples were astonished, staring at the lifeless tree, struggling to comprehend the suddenness and authority of his words. Jesus used the moment to teach them about faith and prayer, reminding them that trust in God could move mountains, and that faith, even as small as a mustard seed, could accomplish the impossible. The incident left a profound impression. Those who witnessed it began to understand that Jesus' authority extended beyond healing or miracles. It reached into nature and the spiritual life of people, calling for faith that bore real fruit. The miracles of Jesus reveal more than supernatural power. They reveal the heart of God. From turning water into wine at a humble wedding to raising Lazarus from the dead, each act carried a message of compassion, authority, and hope. Through his touch, his words, and his presence, Jesus restored the sick, opened blind eyes, fed the hungry, calmed storms, and brought life where there had been only despair. Every miracle told a story: a widow's loss, a child's illness, a man's blindness, or the cries of desperate parents. Each act of healing or provision pointed to a greater truth: that God's kingdom is marked by mercy, faith, and abundant life. Even the ordinary moments became extraordinary signs, revealing the divine authority of Christ through simple acts of obedience and compassion. Beyond physical healing, Jesus' miracles confronted cultural barriers, religious expectations, and hardened hearts. Healing on the Sabbath, reaching across boundaries and freeing those bound by spiritual oppression, his works invited all who witnessed them to reconsider what they believed about God, power, and grace. These miracles were never meant to end in amazement alone. They were invitations to trust, to believe, and to follow. And yet, even with all that is recorded, the Gospels remind us that what we read is only a glimpse of his works. As John concludes, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written everyone, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written." Amen. These miracles call for more than admiration. They call for faith. To believe is not merely to witness what Jesus can do, but to trust who he is. The invitation remains: come, see, believe, and follow.